In this video, I will be performing the suite in B minor by Jean-Nicolas Geoffroy. The suite has 6 movements: Allemande, Courante, Sarabande, Menuet, Gavotte, and Chaconne. Like some other suites in the manuscript containing Geoffroy's works, this suite also exists in a second version in the key of A minor. Additionally, the Allemande appears a third time in yet another tonality, namely D minor. I decided to play the B minor version of this suite for a variety of reasons. First, B minor is not a tonality we encounter very often in this repertory. Secondly, in the Rameau temperament I like to use, B minor acquires a much more colorful and rather poignant character compared to A minor, and I think these qualities fit the movements of this suite quite well. Finally, I was intrigued by Geoffroy's inventive choice for a key signature. Normally, B minor has a key signature of 2 sharps, namely F sharp and C sharp. Geoffroy, however, provides a key signature of 4 sharps, so in addition to F sharp and C sharp, there's also G sharp and A sharp. This choice may appear peculiar at first. However, what Geoffroy has actually done is to base his key signature on the ascending melodic minor form of the scale, whereas in modern usage, key signatures for minor scales reflect the natural minor form. Let me show you what I mean. So if we're in B minor, the natural minor form of the scale contains 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp. So but in the melodic minor form, when we ascend, in other words, when we go up the scale, the 6th and the 7th scale degrees are raised. So instead of having G natural and A natural, we actually have G sharp and A sharp, so that the ascending form becomes this. And when we descend, of course, in the melodic minor, we go back to the natural minor form. Incidentally, this is not the only time Geoffroy followed this procedure. For his suite in F minor, he again provided a key signature based on the ascending melodic minor form of the scale. So instead of the usual 4 flats, namely B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat, there are only 2, B flat and A flat. Since I have already recorded the suite in F minor, I will put a link to that video in the video description. And in case you were wondering, yes, it does take a little getting used to reading the score when a key signature is so different, especially considering Geoffroy's delight in chromaticism and unusual harmonies. In this introduction, I would like to concentrate on 3 of the movements: the Allemande, the Sarabande, and the Chaconne. The one prominent harmonic feature of the Allemande is the pervasive use of chromatic alterations, that is, having both the natural form of a note as well as its half-step modification by a sharp or a flat. The chromatic alterations in this Allemande usually involve 3 notes, namely D, G, and A. So we have juxtapositions between D and D sharp, G and G sharp, and A sharp. The overall effect of these chromatic alterations, at least the way I perceive it, is that of a highly expressive piece overflowing with harmonic twists. Let me demonstrate by looking at the chromatic alterations in the first section of the Allemande. And what I want to do first of all is play the opening 6 or so measures of the Allemande, and then I will show you where these occur. But you can also kind of be on the lookout for them and kind of like listen for certain harmonic twists that happen, because I think it's fairly easy to hear. Etc., etc. So let me start now again, and I will show you where these happen. The first one is going to happen in the first measure, and it's going to involve D and D sharp. So we have D now here, and there we get the D sharp. Let me continue now. Here's the other one, and now it's going to happen in two different voices. We have G natural in the soprano line, and then we are going to have a G sharp in the bass, and immediately after that we're going to have an A natural versus an A sharp in the bass again. So if I continue from here, we have another one. And here comes another one now between, again, A sharp and A natural. And it happens in the alto line. Here's the A sharp. And now here's the A natural. And immediately after that, you notice that now my left hand, the bass, has a D sharp. And we are going to very, very quickly get to a D natural. Now we have D natural. So. And continuing, here's again an A sharp, followed immediately by an A natural in the soprano line. So the entire Allemande is really full of all of these different chromatic alterations. Another issue I would like to mention regarding the Allemande concerns the two different readings of the left-hand chord in measure 19, which is 2 measures before the end of the piece. Here, the B minor version and the A minor version have a different chord. So what you get in the B minor is this, and I will start a little beforehand. And we're talking about this chord. In other words, an F sharp major chord. Now the A minor version does something a little different. So we have this kind of chord. This complicates the harmony a little bit more, because what this means, if you think of it in terms of theory, is that in the B minor version we get the F sharp major chord sooner, which is of course our dominant, and then we resolve to B minor for the end of the piece. In the A minor version, what we actually have is a C sharp major chord. So we get the secondary dominant, the dominant of F sharp, that then is going to end in B minor. Personally, I prefer the chord of the A minor version because it complicates matters a little bit, but what I have decided to do is perform both options. So I play the chord of the B minor version the first time, and when I repeat the section, I play the chord that appears in the A minor version. In the Sarabande, I want to highlight two instances of Geoffroy's colorful and adventurous harmonic language that occur right after one another in the middle of the first section, and specifically in measures 4 and 5. Let me start playing the piece from the beginning, and then I will alert you to those two events when I get to them. Here's the first one, and here's the second one. Now, obviously, there is more than one way to listen to these harmonic events, but let me tell you at least the way I hear them and why I feel that they are kind of noteworthy. In the first event, what I would find a little more normal, or let's say what I would expect to happen, is if the bass line went directly to G natural and then to F sharp, and not have this chromatic inflection. In other words, what I would find more normal is this. And of course, Geoffroy kind of chromaticizes it a little bit. And actually, because I find it a little spicy, shall we say, I actually add a little more spice with what I do in the melody. Because if we look at the melody on its own, it kind of asks for a little trill. So this one. And what happens is, if I actually trill this way with a G natural, that's when you play the G sharp in the left hand. So this is what happens, in other words. So I take something that to me at least sounds spicy and I make it slightly more spicy. Now the next event that I mentioned, this one, what is happening here is that in the right hand we have a C sharp and an A, and then the soprano line is going to ascend to a C natural, so chromatic alteration in other words, but we are supposed to be holding on to the C sharp, so it's and so, considering that this is also the highest note of that entire section, this is a very, very expressive moment. And I think Geoffroy highlights how expressive it is by not just using the highest note that he has used up to that point, but by also introducing this dissonance. Incidentally, another interesting passage occurs close to the end of the second section, where we have something very similar. So in this measure that I just played, we have this ascending melodic line that then descends. And what is going to happen in measure 19, but let's say about 5 measures before the end of the piece, is we get something fairly similar. And again, he does something very similar to what he did before, because we have this and again we have this chromatic alteration, G to G sharp. To me, again, it would make more sense if he kept the G natural. It's a more expected chord, but he chromaticizes it again. Which is, of course, part of his musical style, but this is one of the reasons I find his music not just so expressive, but also so compelling. The Chaconne contains 3 features we typically find in chaconnes by Geoffroy. First of all, it is in rondo form. That is, we have a refrain alternating with contrasting sections we usually refer to as couplets. This particular chaconne has 3 couplets. The second feature is the presence of descending bass lines in the couplets. These descending bass lines can be either diatonic or, more frequently, chromatic. In this particular chaconne, they mainly appear in the first and third couplets. The third feature concerns a distinctive texture that Geoffroy usually employs in the last couplet of a chaconne, which is also the case in this particular one. And it's a type of texture that seems to consist exclusively of chordal textures, and oftentimes also involves the presence of a pedal point, that is, having a sustained note in the bass while the harmonies in the other parts continue to evolve. To me, at least, such sections give the impression of someone improvising, or at least spontaneously exploring different harmonic possibilities. Geoffroy also indulges his preference for chords richer than simple triads, and thus populates these chordal sections with 7th and even 9th chords, something that creates a very jazzy sound. Let me demonstrate these 3 features. The first one that I want to talk about is the descending bass lines, and as I mentioned, these occur in the first and last couplet in this particular chaconne. So the other thing that is going to happen here is that we will get a fairly extensive descent. In other words, in the first couplet, we start in this note B, and eventually, we are going to make our way downwards all the way to this F sharp. So it's a fairly large descent. Within that descent, though, we are going to get hints of descending tetrachords. Usually minor tetrachords, but not always. Sometimes they're not exactly minor tetrachords. So if I were to play the very beginning of this first couplet and just look at the bass line, we're going to start with a tetrachord, a descending tetrachord. Then we get a little connecting phrase, and then another descending tetrachord, then another connecting phrase, in other words, another tetrachord, but a little more chromaticized. So we get these descending tetrachords within this entire descent. If I were to play both lines together, it sounds like this. And of course, if I continue this, continue to play from where I left off, you will notice that the left hand will continue descending. And we end there. So it's quite an extensive descent. Now, in the last couplet, this descent occurs after we get a pedal point. So let me start now and play you the pedal point of the last couplet, and then we're going to go into the descent, which again is going to also be made up a little bit of some of these tetrachords. What is going to happen here is that the pedal point, the note that we're going to keep playing, is in the bass, and it concerns the note B. And what I will try to do is I will play that section where we have that pedal point, and what I will try to do is play the bass line with the note B always a little ahead so that you can actually hear it better. Now we're going to very briefly touch upon A sharp, and we end up in B. Now, if I were to continue playing the third couplet, here is where we would start now descending, and the descent in this case is going to be more chromatic than what we had heard before. So we start on B. Here's now A sharp, A natural, G sharp, G natural, F sharp. So up to here is all chromatic. Now it's going to change a little bit. Etc., etc. Here the descent is not going to be so extensive. In other words, what the trajectory is from this B where we started to this F sharp at the end of the couplet. The final thing that I wanted to mention, the other characteristic, is the use of 7th and 9th chords, and what I mean by this, and I will demonstrate by using one particular 9th chord that actually appears in this final couplet, is that what happens is when we have a normal triad, we make it into a 7th chord by adding another third, so that now the interval between the bass and this note is a 7th. And then a 9th chord means that we add yet another third on top. And now what happens is that the distance, or rather the interval, between the bass and the soprano and the top note is a 9th. So this, of course, in this particular case, it's a minor 9th, or if we take the octave away, just a half step. So It's again a very spicy chord, and I call all of these harmonies jazzy because jazz music uses a lot of seventh and ninth chords, and Geoffroy uses more ninth chords than almost any other composer of the 17th century that I know of. I could be wrong about that, but one thing that I would say makes them also very prominent is that Geoffroy emphasizes them. In other words, he puts them in on the first beat of a certain measure, or on strong beats, or in very prominent places in his music. So this particular one, for instance, happens on the first beat of a measure, and let me approach it so that you will hear it. And here it is. So it's this particular one. This chaconne also contains a significant amount of chromatic alterations, something we already observed happening in the Allemande. And you probably heard some of these, and you could probably guess that they were going to happen anyway, because we have so much chromaticism even in these descending lines that I was playing for you. I'm not going to actually demonstrate them here in detail, since I already discussed their presence in the Allemande. But again, as you listen to the chaconne, be on the lookout for them. One final remark regarding the score of the chaconne. You will notice that in a few places there are indications to go to different pages in order to find the continuation of the piece. These indications are printed as they appear in the original manuscript containing Geoffroy's works, and don't actually refer to the modern score. The reason for these indications is that this piece was a very late addition to the manuscript. So apparently the scribe could only find enough blank space to copy the piece in 4 different non-consecutive pages. Hence, he had to provide written indications to let the performer know where to find the different sections of the piece. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the performance.